Alors, écoutez, il me reste à vous accueillir au Collège de France pour cette troisième conférence de la série Agir pour l'éducation. Je m'exprime, je suis Stanislas Dehaene, professeur de psychologie cognitive expérimentale au Collège de France, mais je m'exprime ici au titre de l'ensemble des professeurs qui ont lancé cette initiative Agir pour l'éducation et dont, évidemment, il y a plusieurs composantes de recherche, d'action dans les écoles, mais aussi cette dimension donc, de conférence à destination de tous, mais particulièrement des enseignants et des formateurs, pour expliquer où en est la science sur tel ou tel domaine et comment on peut l'appliquer dans les classes. Et cette année, nous avons choisi le thème de l'apprentissage de la lecture et ses difficultés. Et je suis très heureux dans cette troisième conférence d'accueillir le professeur Naama Friedmann, qui nous fait l'honneur de venir spécialement de Tel-Aviv, où elle est professeure à l'université de Tel-Aviv, et qui est une des grandes spécialistes mondiales des troubles de la lecture, parmi d'autres sujets, la linguistique notamment. Mais elle travaille donc depuis des années avec maintenant des centaines, littéralement, de patients qu'elle connaît extrêmement bien, sur des enfants dyslexiques, différents types de dyslexie. Alors, avant de commencer et de laisser la parole à Naama, je voudrais dire une anecdote sur la manière dont on s'est rencontrés. J'ai écrit, comme vous savez, un livre qui s'appelle « Les neurones de la lecture », qui n'est pas mauvais, même s'il commence à être un petit peu ancien maintenant, mais il parle beaucoup de la manière dont le cerveau apprend à lire, etc. Puis il y a un chapitre où j'ai essayé d'aborder la question de la dyslexie. À l'époque, j'avais peu travaillé sur la dyslexie, j'avais lu beaucoup de la littérature, et dans ce chapitre, vous savez, j'explique que la vision dominante de la dyslexie, c'est une origine phonologique. Et à la suite de ce livre, qui est aussi paru en anglais, j'ai reçu un email de collègues, dont Naama et Anne Castles d'Australie, qui m'ont dit « Le livre est pas mal, mais ce chapitre, ça ne va pas ». Alors, j'ai regardé attentivement cet email et effectivement, j'ai constaté qu'ils avaient travaillé de façon beaucoup plus riche que ce que j'avais pu voir dans la littérature, pas toujours d'ailleurs publié dans les mêmes revues du plus haut niveau que cette théorie phonologique dominante, mais avec beaucoup, et comme vous allez voir ce soir, beaucoup d'évidence qu'il y a effectivement beaucoup de sous-types de dyslexie très différents, auxquels je n'avais pas forcément rendu hommage et justice dans mon livre. Donc il faudrait faire une deuxième édition, ce que je n'ai pas encore fait. Vous trouverez sur Internet néanmoins une version révisée, en quelque sorte, une sorte de chapitre raccourci du contenu du livre dans lequel on discute avec Naama. Il y a des critiques du livre, dont cette critique-là, et puis il y a ma réponse et une tentative de réconcilier et effectivement de rendre justice à ce domaine qui est plus complexe que ce que j'avais pu en dire à l'époque, même si j'avais parlé quand même de dyslexie visuelle également. Vous allez voir ce soir donc que si on regarde attentivement le type d'erreurs que font les élèves, eh bien, on découvre qu'on ne devrait jamais parler de la dyslexie, mais qu'on devrait parler des dyslexies, parce qu'il y a une panoplie de dyslexies extrêmement différentes les unes des autres, et que c'est en comprenant ces différentes formes que l'on peut d'une part jeter de la lumière sur l'organisation du système cognitif qui apprend à lire et qui est complexe, il y a plusieurs composantes, et puis bien sûr essayer d'aider ces enfants, et la manière de les aider n'est pas du tout la même, comme va l'expliquer le professeur Naama Friedmann dans quelques instants, suivant le type de dyslexie qui est mis en jeu. Voilà, sans plus attendre, et après cette anecdote, je vous remercie donc d'accueillir le professeur Naama Friedmann.
Bonjour à tous. I'm sorry, this is all the French that I'm going to use this evening. And this is better? Yes. Bonjour à tous. And I'm very happy to be here and to help you with this initiative of improving education and reading acquisition and impairments. And I want to start by telling you about Tali. Tali is a 11-year-old girl, and her mother called me a few years ago. She was very stressed, the mother, and she said, listen, Tali for some time now already cannot do her homework. And today she decided that she's not going to school anymore. And it was in the middle of 6th grade. And she asked me, I know that you're working on dyslexia. Maybe you can help her. And the question, and I think this is a question that many of you get. I'm sure some of you got it this morning in school, right? There is a child who has problems in school, and you want to help them, but you need to know how. And what I want to do today is to show you that the moment we understand better what the problem of the child is, what exactly the type of dyslexia that the child has, we have a better chance of helping them. we will know how to teach them better, and we will know how to treat them better. So the story of Tali continues in the more or less towards the middle of this talk, but I'll start with the general idea that dyslexia is a reading disorder, and there are different types, as Professor Dehan said. There are different types of dyslexia, and each type of dyslexia requires different treatment and different teaching. So what exactly does it mean that there are different types of dyslexia? If we think that there are different stages of reading, there is a visual stage of reading, there is a stage in which we say the words out loud, each of them can be impaired. And for each impairment, we have a different type of diagnosis. Once we know the exact diagnosis, so we have the exact type of dyslexia, then we know how to find a proper teaching and proper treatment. So this is what we are going to do together today. So when we talk about reading, reading starts with a written word, and it gets to reading aloud and also to comprehension of the written words. And we are using a model that gets from the written word to reading aloud and to comprehension. And I will explain about this model in a second, but the idea is that we start with analyzing how the written word is written, which letters there are, and we finish with either saying the word out loud or with the meaning of the words. And the terms are a bit more complex, but that's the idea. And the main idea is that each of these components can be impaired. And each of these impairments creates a different type of dyslexia. Okay? And we currently know of 23 types of dyslexia. I promise I will not talk about all these dyslexias today. What I want to do today is to give you a general view of what kinds of dyslexia there are. And then I will focus on 4 types of dyslexia that are the most common. So the ones that there is a better chance that you will find them in the kids that you're working with. Okay, so let's start with the model. So what exactly are the stages from the moment we see a written word on page until we are able to understand it and to say it? The very first stage is the analysis of the written words. At this stage, we know which letters there are in the word. We don't know the names of the letters, and we don't know the sounds of the letters, but we identify which letters there are and what their order is. Then once we have the letters, we are going to look in some kind of a dictionary, in a lexicon that we have in our mind, which is a written word dictionary. This is for a child who knows, for example, 1,000 written words. All these written words will be listed in this kind of lexicon, in the dictionary. Okay? So we have a dictionary of written words. From there, if we identified the word in this lexicon, we are going to look for this word, to the sound of this word, in the phonological lexicon. So we have also a list of the way these words sound. And from there, we are going to prepare for production of these words. Now, always, we also want to understand the words that we are reading. So we go from the orthographic, from the written word lexicon, to the meaning. So at this point, we are able to read words that we know already, and we are able to understand words that we know their written form. But children always encounter new words, right? And also us, as adults, we encounter new words. So how do we read new words that are not in our lexicons? We convert letters to sounds. Right? So if we find a word like preparation, and we don't know this word, then we know that P is P and R is R, etc. And then we convert letters to sounds. So that's the idea of the general idea of this reading model. And we can convert it to the terms the terms that you will find in scientific articles. So the written word is called orthographic. So we have an orthographic visual analysis. This is the stage of identifying letters and their order. Orthographic input lexicon is the written word lexicon. Phonological output lexicon is the spoken words lexicon. Phonological output buffer is a stage in which we prepare all these phonological, all these sounds for saying them. Then we have semantic lexicon and conceptual system. That's the meaning part. And grapheme to phonic conversion is just a complicated way to say letter to sound conversion. Now, when we look at this whole model, we can identify several routes. The most important route through which skilled readers read is the lexical route. The lexical route goes from the written words lexicon to the spoken word lexicon. This is why it's called lexical, because it goes between the lexicons. Okay? So a child who knows the written form of the word and a child who knows the phonological form of the word will be able to use the lexical route and read the words that he or she knows. When we have a lexical semantic route that goes from the written word to its meaning, and we have the letter to sound route that is called the sublexical route or the non-lexical route through which we read new words. This is the orange route. Okay? So the idea is that we have routes that function in parallel. Now that we know this process of reading written words, let's look at what happens in general. Sorry. In general, when each of these components fails. And let's start with the very first stage. The very first stage is a stage of visual analysis. We see written words. The first thing that we need to know is to...
We're going to turn this so that people can see you on Zoom. Here we go.
Okay, thank you. Hello, people on Zoom. I'm happy that you can see me, but I'm sorry I cannot see you. So we start with the very first stage of the visual analysis. So when we see a written word, we have to know exactly which letters appear in these words and what their order is, and to hold all these letters until the next stages. So let's look at each of these functions of the very first stage. Now, again, why do I tell you about this model and about these stages? Because when one of them is impaired, we have dyslexia. And now we need to understand about each of these components to understand about each of the types of dyslexia. So the very first thing that we do when we see a word like pardon, and I apologize for my French, how do you say? Excuse my French. Then a letter, we have to identify which letters there are here. So even if it's a big P or small p, if it's a yellow P or a P in italics, it's always a P, right? So we need to identify that there is a P and an A and a T and an R and an O and an S. Now, of course, when this thing fails, we have a dyslexia of identification of these letters. And not surprisingly, it's called letter identity dyslexia. Okay, so children and adults who have letter identity dyslexia, sometimes they even don't know that the capital A and the small a are the same letter. And when they read whole words, they might read instead of the word real, they would read it read. Okay? So substituting the L with a D. Or instead of real, call it deal. So substituting R with a D. Okay? And I see you nodding. Probably you think about children that you saw that have this kind of problem, right? There are some children who fail to recognize the letters, not only in first grade, but also when they are older. Now, I told you that we look at this word and we identify that there is a P and an A and a T and an R and an O and S. This is, of course, not enough to identify the word, right? Because if we know that there is P, A, T, R, O, and S, we might get patron, right? So it's not enough to know which letters there are. We want to know also what the order of the letters within the word. What happens if a child has a problem with knowing what the order of the letters within the word? What kind of errors will we get? We'll have the right letters in the wrong order, right? So this child might read pardon as patron, or in English, reading slime as smile. Okay? This is letter position dyslexia, and we will talk about it in more detail later. What else do we need to do? Sometimes, actually usually, we read more than one word at the same time. So sometimes we see the word pardon, but we also see next to it another word. And our task is not only to identify which letters they are and what their order is within the word, we also need to know which letter belongs to which word, right? Because if we don't do it well, if we don't know the P belongs to the first word and not to the second word, we might get something like pardon, right? So this kind of dyslexia of not knowing which letter belongs to which word is called attentional dyslexia. We'll talk about it as well in detail later. And I'm sure you saw children like that who tell you all the letters jump in my face, right? I can't read this book. I see too many letters and they scramble. These are usually children who have these migrations of letters between words. And I see you nodding. You saw these children. It's quite a common type of dyslexia. And we will talk today about how to help these children. What else? The last part of this orthographic visual analysis stage is a stage in which we hold all these letters of the two words, maybe, the letters and their order, and until we are able to look in the lexicon and find the word. This kind of it's a kind of working memory, a kind of written word memory that holds this information for a short time. So if there is a problem there, the most problematic item would be a long word. And if there are morphologically complex words, like, for example, retrouverai, or unbelievable, they might read it as believable or as believe, right? So long words is very difficult for this kind of working memory to hold, and then some of the letters fall. Again, quite a common type of dyslexia. I'll just mention another type of dyslexia in this very first stage. It's called neglect dyslexia, and in this case, it usually affects the left side of the words. Children fail to read the left side of the word, and then they might substitute letters on the left or omit letters of the left. So if the word is price, they might read it as rice. Okay. So this is, now we talked, notice that we only talked about the very first stage of the orthographic visual analysis, and we already have 5 dyslexias. Okay? Now we move forward to the next stage, and you know that the next stage is the orthographic the orthographic input lexicon, the lexicon that holds the written words. What happens if we cannot use this lexicon of written words? Look at this model. From where can we read? How can we read if we don't have the lexical root? Exactly, right. We can read through the sublexical root. So if we cannot use the lexical root, we will have to read each word as if it were a new word. And in this case, if it's English, for example, and we have to read the word walk, we can read it as walk, right? We know if we read through the lexicon, we know that we don't say the letter L, but if we read it letter to sound, in letter to sound conversion, we might say walk. And this is called surface dyslexia. Why is it called surface dyslexia? Because we read it on the surface. We don't go into the lexicon, we read it on the surface. And this kind of surface dyslexia can happen because of a deficit in the written word lexicon or in the spoken word lexicon. Both of them are in the lexical root. What another type of dyslexia that can, I'm not sure you can see, there is an orange arrow here. The orange arrow connects the written words lexicon with meaning. If there is a problem in the arrow, so if it's like a problem in a cable, it might be that the lexicon is okay, the meaning is okay, but the cable that is connecting between them is broken. In this case, they will be able to understand words that they hear, but if the word is written, they will not be able to understand them. And again, it's a problem if children are not able to understand words that they read. right? And in this case, we might want to give them, to read the text to them instead of asking them to understand written texts. And this is called the impaired comprehension of written words or direct dyslexia. Now, of course, if there is a problem in the meaning component, in the semantic lexicon, in this case, children will not be able to understand words, written words, spoken words. They will not be able to produce words correctly. Instead of giraffe, they might say zebra. Right? So this will cause semantic errors in production and in comprehension. What happens, and we are almost done with mapping of all the dyslexias and before going into details in some specific dyslexias, what happens when there is a deficit in letter to sound conversion? What will be the type of words that they are not able to read? New words, right? Non-words. So they will be able to read words that are already in their lexicons, but the moment they see a new word, they will not be able to read it. If they don't know Champollion, for example, and they see this word, they will not be able to read it. And this is called phonological dyslexia because they have problems in converting the letters to their phonological form, to their sound. And what happens, and that's, I think, the penultimate one, almost the last one, what happens if there is a problem both in the sublexical root, in converting letters to sounds, and in the connection between the two lexicons? In this case, we have it's a double deficit, and it's called deep dyslexia. Deep dyslexia, imagine that someone has a problem both in the orange connection between the two lexicons and in the letter to sound reading. How would they be able to read at all? Through where? Can you look and see what is the route that is available for them? Right. So they have to go from the orthographic lexicon to the semantic lexicon, and from there to the phonological lexicon. What does it mean? It means that if they see, for example, a hall, the word hall, lecture hall, they will imagine a lecture hall, and then they will say what they imagine. So, for example, they might say lecture, or people, or audience, or Collège de France, or a big room, right? And this is what they do. They, instead of reading the exact written word, they say something that is related to the meaning of this word. And this is very serious. Luckily, it's not very common, but it exists. The very final step of reading aloud is this kind of phonological working memory component. So it's a component, imagine that we convert letters to sounds, and we convert from the written lexicon to the spoken lexicon, and we have to say these words. We need to have some kind of memory that holds all these sounds until we finish saying the word, right? And this component that holds all these sounds until we finish saying the word, that assembles all the sounds together, is called the phonological output buffer. And when there is a deficit in the buffer, because it's a working memory component, again, the length of the word is very important. So if we have long words, they will have or morphologically complex words, like unbelievable. They will have problems holding all these sounds, connecting them, assembling them, and producing them. So this is just to give you an overview of the different types of dyslexias that can occur. And now we're going to focus on 4 dyslexias. Okay? So now we are focusing on attentional dyslexia, letter position dyslexia, surface dyslexia, and vowel dyslexia. And I'll share with you the way each of these the discussion of each of these dyslexias is going to happen. I'm going to tell you about the properties of each dyslexia, and then we are going to ask, what are the implications for diagnosis? So what do we need now that we know this type of dyslexia intimately? Exactly how do we diagnose this dyslexia? What kinds of words do we have to present? What do we have to do in order to know that this child has this kind of dyslexia? And the moment that we know something about diagnosis, we'll go to the next stage and we'll ask, how can we help children who have this kind of dyslexia? Okay, so we're going to start with the first dyslexia. It's called attentional dyslexia. The reason it's called attentional dyslexia is that it doesn't have anything to do with attention. Okay, but in 1977, when Tim Challis and Warrington discovered this dyslexia, they thought it has something to do with attention. Now we know that it doesn't. But I'll show you, I'll give you, I'll let you feel what individuals with attentional dyslexia feel. Okay, so I'm going to show you very quickly 2 words on the screen. I'm going to, in the beginning, it's going to be English, and then I'm going to show you also something in French, because I know there are different backgrounds here. And try to, it's going to be really, really quick, and so quick that people who have very good reading don't have time to do all of this reading component, all the reading stages. Okay, so don't be worried if you don't manage. Just tell me what you think you saw. Okay, so we are going to start with the first pair. Are you ready? 2 words on the screen in English. Okay. What did you see? Goat? Coat? Coal? Goal? Okay. So if I'm summarizing, some of you saw coat, some goat, some coal, and some coat. Okay? There were only 2 words here. I'll show you later what exactly you saw. But maybe now that you had practice, let's try another pair. Okay? Ready? Wine? Wild? Mild? Mild. Mild wine? Okay. Okay. So we had wild, mind, mine, and wine. Of course, it's Paris. We have to have wine. Okay, now let's try an example in French. Again, 2 words in French. Are you ready? Okay. Livre. You are livre. Vivre. Litre. Vitre. Okay. Okay. So again, you notice that we have 4 words coming up. Livre, vivre, litre, and vitre. In a second, I'll show you what I actually showed you, but for a longer time. Let's just do the final word pair, and then again in French, and then we'll see what's going on here. Okay, ready? Pain? Okay, you see the exact same issue happens here. So let's see what was there. Remember the first pair where we saw coat and goat and goal and coal? So actually there was no coat here, but we saw coat, right? And there was no, so why did we see coat? And I'm saying we because I still don't have time to see this word, so I don't know what happened here. How do we see coat? What happens here? If we saw in the second word, we saw coat. We had the time to identify the letters. We had the time to identify the order of the letters. What we didn't have time to do is to know which letter belongs to which word in this very, very quick presentation. And therefore, if we look, for example, at the second word, we knew that there was somewhere C and O, C in the beginning, O and A in the middle, and T in the end. We just didn't know that the T belonged to the first word and not to the second word. And this is why we actually saw the word coat. And the same if we saw in the first word the word goal. It might also be related to what you like to watch, or if you like football, but it's also just a matter of not being able to identify which letter belongs to which word. Now let's look at the second pair. Was there wine on the screen? No. We saw wine. Why? Because maybe the W migrated to the second word. Maybe you saw mind, first of all, because you're interested in cognition. This is why you're here, right? But the second reason is that the D migrated from the first word to the second word. Let's move to French. Was there a livre there? Again, I'm very happy that you saw livre. It means that you like to read. But actually, there was no livre. Why did we see livre, for example, in the first word? Because the V, you knew that there is a V in the middle of the word, but it migrated to the first word. And again, the same happens if you saw in the second word, vitre, for example. The T migrated from the first word to the second. And this is what happened in the last pair. So what is going on here? Normal readers just don't have time to know which letter belonged to which word. And this is why we don't know if it was goat or call or goal. The point is that individuals who have attentional dyslexia, it doesn't matter for how long they see these two words. If they see these two, they don't know if it's litre or livre or vitre or vivre. Exactly like we felt a moment ago. Okay? So this is just a demonstration. Your reading is fine, but this is just a demonstration of how a child who has this kind of attentional dyslexia feels when they have to read more than one word at a time. What they feel is that they are able to read the letters, they are able to know what the order of the letters within the word is. They just know where each word, letter belongs. And then letters jump between words. And this is exactly what happens in attentional dyslexia. Again, without any time constraints. So you can show them the two words for unlimited amount of time, and they still will not be sure if it was livre or vivre. And what kinds of migrations do we see in attentional dyslexia? We see migrations from the second word to the first, from the first to the second, and sometimes we also see migrations of both sides. So I'm going to give you an example of reading aloud in French of a person in 7th grade. So in white on the left, you see the word pair that the child read, and on the right, you're going to see the types of errors that they make. So for example, the first pair, you can see what letter migrated, which letter migrated? B, right? So the B migrated from the second word to the first. Now it's a bit difficult. Where did this D in the second word, you see, I'm not going to try and read it, but instead of P-E-R-T-E, they read it P-E-R-D-E. So where did this D come from? Be creative, please. From the... Okay, that's a very good, that's a different dyslexia, but that's a great idea. We do see another type of dyslexia where D, T, and G, K, and P, B are substituted. But here, look above the word perte. What do you see? Vendu, right? You see the D? The D migrated, kept its before the letter before the end, and now it's moving also to the letter before the end. Okay? So we have migrations from above. So if we look at these kinds of errors, we see that the child makes letter substitutions, but they don't have letter identity dyslexia. It's not that they don't identify the letters. What they do is they just migrate, letters jump between words. So if we are interested in this kind of dyslexia, if you want to identify this kind of dyslexia, now you will all know that you should look around, right? So if you look at a child who makes letter substitutions, you will look at the errors and you will look around. You will look at the words above and below and to the right and to the left of the word, and you will look if in the same position within the word you have this other letter that is substituting the target letter, right? So when you have a child who makes errors of substituting one letter with the other, ask yourself, are these letters appearing in words around this target word? And that can explain this kind of error. So it's not letter identity deficit, it's migrations of letters between words. That's so-called attentional dyslexia. Another thing that we found out when we presented for a large group of children with attentional dyslexia, 2 words either vertically or horizontally, and we counted the number of migrations between words, what we found is that it's exactly the same rate. So it doesn't matter if the words are one above the other or one next to the other, the migration happens. So when we look at a child who reads a text, for example, we have to look not only at the word in the next word, but also at the word above, in the line above and in the line below. Skipping this. The other thing that is very important that we found is that when we look at the migrations between words, what we find is that they mainly occur when the migration creates an existing word. Right? So if the migration, for example, of the last letter in one word to the last letter of the other word creates an existing word, this error will happen. If it doesn't create a word, it will not happen so much. Now, immediately, you can think about the implications for diagnosis, right? What does it mean? It means that we have to create word pairs in which the migrations between the words create existing words. And this is what Professor Dehan and I did in the Malabi test. We created a reading test that includes word pairs that if every letter that migrates between the 2 words creates another existing word. Okay? And then we are able to identify individuals who have attentional dyslexia. So these are examples from this test. And what you could see is that, for example, if you have migration between these 2 words, we get something like vitre and livre. So now we know something about diagnosis, right? We have to look, first of all, we have to look whether the errors come from words around the target word, and we have to use migratable word pairs. Otherwise, we will miss this dyslexia. Okay? If we just show one word at a time, we will miss this dyslexia. If we show word pairs in which migrations between the words don't create words, existing words, we miss this dyslexia. So we know something about diagnosis, but we also want to help these children, right? That's the idea. Remember Tali from the beginning of the talk? How can we help her? So I told her mother, you know what? Bring her to my lab, to my language and brain lab. I'll ask her to read some words. I'll give her some syntactic tasks. We'll see what the problem is. And when we gave her lists of words, first of all, she said, no, I can't do it. And then I told her, as usual, you know, in my office, it's okay to make mistakes. That's fine. Don't worry. We just want to see why it's difficult for you. And then maybe we can help you. And then she made very, very many errors of this kind, of migrations of letters between words. Now we gave her word pairs, migratable word pairs. She made a lot of migrations between the words. And now she's a bright girl. She just has a problem of letters migrating between words. So how can we help her? We asked Tali, can you cut a little window within a piece of cardboard, but in the middle? Are you able to do this with scissors? She's a smart girl. She folded the piece of cardboard and she cut a little square in the middle of this. And then we told her, okay, now take this little piece of cardboard, this reading window, and put it on the same list of words that you had, word pairs that you had problems reading before. And please, maybe try to read with this cardboard. And this is what she did. She placed this piece of cardboard on the text and read. And she was so surprised because it was much, much easier for her to read. Why was it easier for her to read? Because this dyslexia is only migrations of letters between words. So if she sees each time she sees only one word, she doesn't have a problem. Okay? So this is, I think, is a great example for a case in which if you diagnose the dyslexia correctly, you can help the child. And if you just want to see, these are different children that we tried giving them this kind of reading window. In purple, you see the rate of errors when they just read word pairs without anything. And in orange, you can see the rate of errors with this reading window. And TA is Tali. And you can see that when she was just reading without anything, she made a lot of errors. She made almost 30% errors. But when she read with this reading window, she made much fewer errors. The end of this story was that her mother called me 2 weeks. We gave her the cardboard, that she could take it home. And 2 weeks later, her mother called me. And she was so excited. I didn't know if she was, you know, that sometimes in the voice of someone, you don't know if they are crying or smiling. So she was very excited. And I asked her, what happened? And she said, you will never believe what I just saw. Kali sitting on the stairs at home with a book and a piece of cardboard and reading at her leisure. She said this is something that never happened. I still get goosebumps when I tell you that, because that's it. She started liking to read. She went back to school. And it's all because of a piece of cardboard and a good theory. Okay? So the idea is that the moment that you have the right diagnosis, you can really help these children quite easily. There are other ways to help that are not as useful. So we also tried, for example, finger tracking. So just looking at each word in a sequence. In this case, it helps some children, but not all of them. So you can see here 4 children that were significantly helped by the finger. So you could, if you have a child who has this kind of problem, you could try with the finger, but it's less useful than a window. Sometimes we ask them just to put rulers above and below the line, so they still see the words to the right and to the left, but they don't see the words above and below. Still, it's useful. It doesn't solve completely the problem, but it really helps them. Finally, we tried to space. If it's a problem of really focusing on one word, maybe spacing would help. So we tried horizontal space and vertical space and large and small. It helps sometime. So on the right, you can see the average reduction of errors at the group level. So 4% of 7%, not bad. It's significant, but it's not large. And you can see that each column is a different child. You can see that some children were helped by spacing. Still, the window is the best, just empirically, it's the best way to really help these children overcome this problem and start reading books on the stairs at home. So that's attentional dyslexia. Now we are moving to letter position dyslexia. Letter position dyslexia, I think you can already imagine what this is a deficit of letter position. So identifying the order of letters within the word. So for example, instead of reading slime, they might read smile. Instead of trial, trail. And the deficit is a deficit in the letter position. Remember that there was a letter position function in the orthographic visual analysis stage. This is the deficit. Now, does it only affect their reading aloud, or does it also affect their comprehension? If they see the written word parton, will they understand it also as parton? Now let's look at how people understand written words. If they go from the letter position through the orthographic input lexicon to the semantic lexicon, then if they have a problem in this very first stage of letter position, it will also affect the way they understand words. So if we, for example, present to them written words and ask them to explain them, then letter position dyslexia will also affect the way they understand words, which is serious. We have to think about it. So for example, this is an Australian child. He saw the word could, and he explained it, something that brings rain. Why? Why could is something that brings rain? Cloud, right? So he identified the letter correctly, but not the order. What about parties? Why are parties very brave? They are robbers of the sea. Pirates, right. So again, he identified the letter, but not the order. And this is just an example for French to help our interpreters. Okay. So when we look at the the rate of errors in reading aloud and in comprehension, we see that the rate is very similar. So it's not only a problem in reading aloud, it's really also a problem in comprehension. So we have to take care of this issue, because when they read text, they also understand it incorrectly. Most of these errors occur in the middle of the word. So if we compare migrations of letters in the middle, like form and from, and migrations of letters in the end or in the beginning, we see that there are 60 times more errors in the middle than in the edges, in the beginning and the end of the word. So this is something that might help you identify this kind of dyslexia if you see migrations in the middle of the word. And one very, very important thing for diagnosis is that when we compare words that are migratable, like from, if we migrate from, what do we get? Form, right? So it's a migratable word. Migratable word is a word that if you change the order of the letters in the middle, you get another existing word. And you compare it to non-migratable words, like frog. What can we get from a frog? A prince, right? But no migration. So when we took 65 children with letter position dyslexia, and we compared migratable words like from and non-migratable words like frog, and we see very, very consistently they almost never make errors in frog, and they make errors in from. So they make errors mainly in migratable words. What does it mean for diagnosis? It means that we have to include migratable words in diagnosis. And if we don't include migratable words in diagnosis, we might miss this kind of dyslexia. So if we don't present words like patrons, like form, we will not see this dyslexia. And indeed, again, we created this kind of migratable words. There are words here in English, in French, in Italian. Each of you can choose to guess what the migratable counterpart of each word is in the language that you prefer. I know that there are some Italians here that watch us also from home. So you get other existing words, right? And this is also something that we worked on in the Malaby, in the French screening test. We created a list of migratable words. So words in which migration of middle letters create existing words. And then using this kind of migratable words, we were able to identify letter position dyslexia in Hebrew and in Arabic, in English, in Italian, in Turkish, Russian, French, and even in Israeli Sign Language. But I think you might be more interested in French, so I'm going to show you an example of a child with letter position dyslexia that Cassandra here was working with in a school called Seren. It's a school for children with reading disabilities or language learning disorders who have a normal IQ. And look what Cassandra found. This child, you can see on the left the word that the child had to read, and on the right, the way he read it. Can you see something common to all the errors that he made? All of these errors are migrations of letters within the word. Okay? So this child has letter position dyslexia. The moment we present the right stimuli, the right words, we are able to identify this kind of dyslexia. Before that, we wouldn't be able to know which kind of dyslexia they have. So thanks to this kind of list of migratable words, we are able to identify it. I can tell you about, there's a wonderful group of reading researchers in Australia, in Sydney. And Saskia Konen, you can see here, she's the first author here. She was seeing 3 children in her clinic. They came because they had complaints about reading. Either they or their parents had concerns about their reading. They came to the clinic. Saskia Konen tested them with the standard tests, and they were fine. But we never tell a child who says that they have a problem in reading, we never tell them, no, you don't have a problem in reading, right? What we need to do is to try and understand why they feel that they have a problem in reading, right? Luckily, Saskia had in her drawer a list of migratable words in English. She presented these words to these children, and she was able to identify that they had letter position dyslexia, right? So the point here is that we might miss, so children suffer, they struggle, they have problems in reading aloud, they have problems in comprehension, but if we want to help them, first of all, we have to identify what the problem is. And in order to identify what the problem is, we need to know all kinds of words that we have to present in order to identify the type of dyslexia. And in this case, these 3 children had letter position dyslexia. So, implication for diagnosis. First of all, we have to look at the error types. Now you know that if a child has problems in reading aloud, you look whether they have transpositions in the middle letters of the word. That's the first thing. The second thing is what kind of words we need or what kind of stimuli we want to present. So we said we want to present migratable words, but do we present single migratable words or words in a text? Look at the percent of errors in single words and the percent of errors within text. You see that there are far more errors in single words than in text. Why? Because look at this sentence. I think it will rain because I see a gray cloud. Nobody will read it, I think it will rain because I see a great could, right? The context helps us to reduce the number of errors. This is why we don't present context if we want to diagnose, for example, letter position dyslexia. We present a list of unrelated words. Finally, how do we help this kind of dyslexia? What do we do? So we compared all kinds of manipulations on the text, spacing between letters, coloring each letter in a different color, putting signs between the letters, and also tracking with the finger one letter at a time. I think that the experienced teachers already maybe have a feeling of what is going to help them. We did it it took us some years to test many children with all these manipulations, and this is what we get. So this is percent errors. This is errors without anything. And these are the percentage of errors with the different kinds of manipulations. And the most important thing is that finger, so just reading with the finger, letter by letter, reduces, you can see, it reduces the rate of transposition in a wonderful way. Why am I so happy that this is the solution that helps? Because this is something that we can tell a child, just read it with the finger. We don't need to add signs between the letters or space the letters. Just read with your finger, letter by letter, and it's better. What about coloring each letter in a different color? Well, research also tells us not only what works, but also what doesn't work. And coloring each letter in a different color really doesn't work. Not only does it not work, it's even much worse. Now let's think for a second, why is it much worse? Because not only do we have to connect the letter to the position, we also need to connect the letter with the position and with the color. So we have another feature that we need to connect. And this makes it even more difficult. So we don't need to start taking all our colors and color the letters in different colors. One more thing, I know that first, there are differences between countries, but in some countries, it's very common to diagnose children with dyslexia as children with attention problems, and then give them methylphenidate, Ritalin. I don't know how common it is in France, but it is common. So, of course, one question that we want to ask is whether giving Ritalin to a child reduces the number of transpositions. So we did this too. We tested individuals who get Ritalin for their attentional problems and also have letter position dyslexia. And we tested whether when they take Ritalin, they make fewer transpositions than when they don't take Ritalin. And this is the answer. It doesn't matter at all. So we get exactly the same rate of transpositions with Ritalin and without. It is not an attentional problem. It is a problem in letter encoding, in the encoding of letter position, and this is why Ritalin doesn't have anything to do with it. Okay, we are getting to the third type of dyslexia. Now I'm going to discuss two dyslexias, but in shorter time. Surface dyslexia, another thing that is quite common. I chose to bring it here because I think in French it affects a lot of children. What is surface dyslexia? I remind you, surface dyslexia is a problem in the lexical root. So if there is a problem in the lexical root, children have to read how? Through the sublexical root, right? So they have to read via conversion of letters to sounds. What does it mean? It means that if a word is regular, like the word boy, for example, they will read it correctly. But if the word is irregular, so if we read it in translation of letters to sounds, we get something that is not the right word, then it's a problem. So if we take a word like walk, they might read it as walk, or a word like stomach, they might read it as stomach, right? If I give you examples in French, so for me, for example, it took time to understand that I don't read the first word as monsieur, okay? Why do I read it as monsieur? Because if I translate letters to sound, I get monsieur, okay? So these kinds of words, and there are many, many of them in French, are very difficult for children who have surface dyslexia. Because if they read letter to sound, they will get monsieur and retrouveres and femme, okay? So these kinds of words are irregular words in French, and they are the kind of words that we want to present to children in order to diagnose this kind of surface dyslexia. Sorry. Now, another kind of a type of irregular words that are especially useful are words that if we read them incorrectly through letter to sound conversion, we get another existing word. And you can see here some examples, right? So someone might read parfum as perfume, maybe rose and rose, etc. Okay? So these are words that are especially sensitive to this kind of dyslexia. So what is the implication for diagnosis? If we want to diagnose surface dyslexia, we need to present these kind of words that are irregular. And that are, especially the ones that if we read them in conversion of letters to sounds, we get other existing words. What do we need to do when we diagnose, when we sit with the child and we see that they make errors and we want to know if it's surface dyslexia? We have to look at the types of errors again. So each time we look at the types of errors that the child makes. Now we have to know if these errors are a result of reading, if the errors that they make are a result of reading letter in conversion of letters to sounds instead of through the whole word, then we know it's surface dyslexia. What about comprehension in this kind of dyslexia? How do they understand? Now again, here we have to understand exactly what is impaired, where in the lexical root the deficit is. If the deficit is somewhere, remember that this is the root from written word to comprehension. So if the deficit is somewhere in this root, they will be impaired. If the deficit is outside of this root, for example, here, then they will not be impaired in comprehension. And this is quite crucial for knowing what to expect from a child who has problems who has surface dyslexia. Will they understand what they read, or will they not understand what they read? And the idea is the following. If a child has a problem, if a child has a problem here in the phonological output lexicon, they will have problems when they read aloud. They will not have problems in comprehension. Okay? If the child has a problem in the orthographic lexicon, input lexicon, it is in the root of comprehension, and then they will also have problems in understanding, right? So what does it mean for treatment? We have to know exactly where the surface dyslexia is. If the problem is, you can see here the X, if the problem is in the phonological output lexicon or in the connection between the lexicons, then it doesn't affect comprehension at all, right? So what do we tell them? What do we recommend these children? We tell them, don't read aloud. You don't need to read aloud. Just understand what you read, okay? Because in this case, the problem is only in reading aloud. So we don't want to, so we want them to understand what they read. What we also want to do is treat the deficit, right? So in order to treat the deficit, we will work on the connection between the written word and the spoken word, and we will also try to enrich the lexicons. What if the deficit is in the first part, in in the lexicon, in the orthographic input lexicon. What do we do in this case? In this case, we want to show them the same words again and again to increase their exposure to these words so they will put them in their orthographic lexicon. And you know, I'm sure you know better than me, that when a child has this kind of problem and we tell them, you have to read more, this is the thing that they hate the most, right? But this is something that will help them, because what they need is repeated exposure to these words in order to put them in their lexicons. And they also need the connection between the written word and semantics. Okay, I'm going to finish by, I'm almost finished. I'll just tell you there is a surprising finding about children who have surface dyslexia as well as attentional dyslexia, attentional deficits, that when they do a mindfulness meditation, it reduces the number of surface errors that they make. What does it mean? I'm not going deeply into that, but I'm just saying that it seems like attention problems do have something to do with reading, and this is that when there are attentional problems, sometimes children are not keeping the lexical root. And then, if they are not keeping the lexical root, they are reading via the sublexical root, and they make surface errors. If you help them with meditation to stay on the lexical root, you reduce their surface errors. I'm just finishing by saying that there are other types of dyslexia that I'm not going to discuss today, but I want to summarize by. So you'll have this last dyslexia in the presentation, but I just want to summarize and say that we learned today that there are different types of dyslexia. And each type of dyslexia has different types of errors that result from impairments in different stages in the model. What do we need to do in order to teach these children and to treat them? First of all, we have to diagnose the type of dyslexia. How do we diagnose the type of dyslexia? We have to present the relevant stimuli, migratable words, migratable word pairs, irregular words, and we have to look at the types of errors that they make. If we look at the types of errors that they make, we understand the type of dyslexia that they have, and then we can move to the next stage of treating and teaching. And each type of dyslexia requires a different kind of teaching. Remember the reading window or reading with the finger that will help these children read. So I thank my Language and Brain Lab people, and I thank you.